This is Motivation U, the podcast. Podcast. I'm Bob Ganzak, and we're coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill inside the Coach's Podcast Room here in Alachua County, Florida, Gainesville, Florida, Celebration Point, all of that. A couple of things we're going to be talking about. We had a guest who had a little accident happen yesterday evening, so they will be joining us in a couple of weeks. And we won't mention today by any means. But some of the things that I want to talk to you about today or share with you, I'd love to have your input also. So if there's any questions or comments that you want to make, please do. I'm talking today about leadership, like we always talked about. This is a program about leadership. And today I'm going to share a couple of scenarios that have happened in my lifetime and three things that really resonate in the leadership role as we move forward. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO of a big corporation, if you're a brand new manager, you're a supervisor, you're a lead, whatever you're doing in your world, those are things that we're going to kind of discuss today, and I'd love to have your input. Again, like I said, there's three basic stories, or maybe some other things around it, that we're going to discuss in regards to that. And something that really prompted this is last night I was having dinner at my mother-in-law's house, and I was talking to my brother-in-law, and we just kind of shared a lot of ideas and thoughts. And he's a business owner himself, an entrepreneur that is in the retail business, furniture, and it was really nice to just have that discussion. The other thing that I'll mention is a lot of the things that happen in my life, they're stories that I hear in class. Of course, the Dale Carnegie class, we just finished week 3 with 27 professionals here in Gainesville. And it's amazing to hear some of the stories that I get to hear. One of the things that it really tells me is that we may work in different industries, we have similar problems. We may work in different industries, we have similar successes. And those things are really important. So if you do have a question, just on Facebook, just share it. Just put it in the comment there. Jared or Tammy will get me the question, and we'll be able to answer it or share your comments, whatever you would like. So this part of leadership is talking about coaching and some scenarios that kind of revolve around that, and maybe some things to consider. So the first one I want to talk about is where you turn a very good employee, a great employee, into a less than great employee. What do I mean? So, if you got a star, a 5-star employee, sometimes as leaders we can turn them into 3 stars or 2 stars, and that scenario is troublesome. I know that I've seen it, I've heard about it, I've lived it as an individual myself. One of the things that happens when we have a very good employee, somebody that is like excelling at all parts of their job, we take them for granted. We just take them for granted. And what happens in that is that we're not doing the things that we did when they first came in to help them develop to continue to grow. There's something that I'll mention near the end of the talk today, and I'm going to introduce it right now, is we talk a lot about millennials, and I'll get a little bit more into that in detail. But one of the things that millennials look for is training and development. As a matter of fact, that's the number one thing that they look for in a job, statistically saying. It might not be everyone, but they want training and development. That goes also for people that have been working in the same company or the same industry for 10, 15, 20 years. It doesn't matter if you're a nurse, an engineer, or you want to continue to grow. And sometimes we take those individuals for granted because as leaders and many times as supervisors or managers, where does our attention go? To the weak point, to the place that is causing us the most trouble. So that individual that is consistently hitting their, their key performance indicators, those KPIs, they are not even talked to many times. So we take them for granted. We have a lack of communication with them. So think of it an evolution type thing, like a butterfly. You go through the whole cocoon phase and through everything, but when the butterfly is beautiful, then we just kind of look at it and see it. We don't see if it needs any nurturing or anything along those lines. And we do that with our employees. And that's how we take a great employee and turn them into a not as great. Because what happens? That person is going through life also. They're having changes within their family. Their kids are growing, if that might be the case. Their career is moving on. And so things change in their world also. And when we don't identify those changes or support those changes or coach those changes, they start thinking, I'm being taken for granted. I'm not wanted around here anymore. So that communication is vitally important, extremely important. And the big part of that is you have to check your systems. What are you doing on a consistent basis? Are you only coaching those new people coming in? I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said to me that, that we didn't coach that person well when they started. And I asked them, I said, let's take some of the employees that are really doing well, because this individual had left the company. And the person I was talking to, we just didn't start that individual off on the right track, right? We didn't start them off on the right track. And so they kind of got feeling of left out, and they ended. So I said, what are you doing with your other individuals, the people that have been here for a long time? And this individual said to me, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what we're doing. So it really is one of those challenges that we have to take. You can't take those people for granted. Back in the 70s, there was a book written by Tom Peters. And in it, he discussed the theory of management by walking around, MBWA. And that is, that is a cool thing to do. I mean, you really want to do that. As you go through your world, you want to make sure that that you are doing those things that you need to do. So a little technical difficulty. You want to take a break here, Jared? Yeah, if you don't. All right. So we're going to take a break. I'll come back and pick this up right after technical difficulties are fixed.
We still hear it. The sound of victory. The joy of being part of something great. And while things may not be the same right now, we haven't gone anywhere. If you bleed orange and blue, then Meldon Law is the firm for you.
Jeffrey, what are you doing?
Well, I'm joining the band, of course. Since Meldon Law is the official law firm partner of the Florida Gators, I want to help.
Dad, we're litigators. Let's stick to helping people in the courtroom.
Well, can we still hang out and jam a little bit? At Meldon Law, we won't back down.
I apologize for that. We're all set, back on with the video. So let me go back to what we were talking about. We were talking about turning a top employee into a lower level employee by not really giving them the time that they need or that they deserve, that they really deserve. So in that theory of management by walking around, I adopted that and did that. And it got to be the point where it was a habit. I wasn't doing it intentionally. I was just doing it saying, wow, I'm doing a good thing. I'd walk around the radio station and I'd say hello to everybody. But the more that I did it, the less effect it had positively on the team. And that was something that I really had to change. And so I kind of mentally started thinking years ago, management by walking around and then a plus sign. So a plus. When I noticed things, I would set up meetings, one-on-ones, because I knew that a meaningful one-on-one was actually as important and maybe more important to that veteran person, the person that had been hitting their goals, hitting their budgets, doing the things that they needed to do. Their team was, excelling in their area. And that was a real key to the way that I shifted my leadership style. And it came actually from negative feedback. I was getting negative feedback from people. I had a couple of people leave the company, leave the radio station, and I really didn't know why. I had an opportunity to do an exit interview a couple of months down the road, and I asked an individual that I really trusted that had worked for us for a long time, and I said, what happened? And this person told me, he said, Bob, it just became a day that I didn't think you cared anymore. I said, wow, and that was really an eye-opener. A few years ago, I went through that myself, where I was the employee. And I mean, it was something, when I experienced it, it was a hole in my world that I couldn't fill. I knew that, we were doing well as a company, we were growing, but about 90% of the work being done, the revenue coming in, was on my shoulders. I didn't have a time to take any days off. I didn't have a time to do anything. I mean, it was like wall to wall, instructing, consulting, workshops, everything, managing people, and I wasn't getting that feedback. I wasn't feel like I was growing. I didn't have that emotional set. So I became one of those employees that was a top level employee and moved down. I identified that myself from my past and said, this person's not going to give me that. And in my world, if you're working for Dale Carnegie Training, you're working for the best in the business, right? You're working at the top level that you can be. So anything that what I was going to do was going to be a step down. So I decided that I had to coach myself and reignite myself, and that's what I did in that situation. If you're a manager, if you're a leader, a CEO, a COO, somebody, it doesn't matter. If you manage other people and you have 1, 2, 3 people on your team that have been with you and consistently been doing their job at the level of your expectations or the company's expectations or higher, beware. That person needs coaching, needs 2 ears to listen to, as much as the person that is just coming in. So point 1 is make sure you don't take those great employees for granted. They need your time one-on-one as much as the other people that are maybe not performing to where they need to be. That's point 1. Let's go to the second scenario. This one is kind of how do you make a good impression on your team? And sometimes you don't know if you are or if you're not. Now, this story, I got a phone call, or I got a text message from a gentleman that I had not seen in 30 years. He worked for our company back in the early 90s. And I don't know how long he worked for us or anything like that. And he had some questions that he wanted me to answer, and unfortunately, I was not skilled in the area that he was looking for. I tried to give him some ideas, sounding board. He was able to talk to me and bounce some things off of me, really came up with his own solutions for the issue that he was talking about. And then we spent 45 minutes, an hour, just talking. And one of the things that he said to me was that I cared. And I said, what do you mean I cared? And he said, well, it wasn't the one-on-ones that you and I had. It wasn't the conversations that you and I had. It was what I heard from the other employees. And I said, wow, I mean, that's really interesting, you know, and he said, you were always available to people. So this second scenario is, don't always be aware of only the things that are said to you. Be aware of the, what I call water cooler talks. Be aware of the water cooler talks. 2 employees, 3 employees, 4 employees go out to lunch. What are they talking about your organization? You know? And this thing all revolved around an open door policy. You know, do you have an open door policy? or do you not have an open door policy? And what happened in my situation was that I was in a meeting with somebody that was having a problem. And I got a phone call, and I didn't accept the phone call. The secretary called into, the office manager called into my office and said, Bob, you have a phone call. And I said, no, I'm dealing with something here. And the person that was sitting across the table from me said, hey, go ahead, take the call. I said, no. Whatever that is, I don't know if it's a problem or if it's something great or whatever it is, but I do know what's here. I know what's sitting across from me, and let's deal with this. Well, that person went and told somebody else about that. And it was like, wow, what an impact. Now, that wasn't my own idea. I mean, I did it because it had been done to me in the past. My first general manager at a radio station was a gentleman by the name of Chuck Mefford. Chuck was an awesome, awesome person, a great broadcaster. He's in some broadcasting hall of fames in different states, I believe. He was just an excellent, excellent man. Cable was new. That we're talking, look, mid-1980s. Cable ad sales were just starting to pick up. And in Lansing, Michigan, I was local sales manager of a radio team in Lansing, Michigan. And I was approached by the cable company to come over to them to become a manager in their sales department. And it was more money, it was something that was just coming out, and I really was giving it some thought. And Chuck had heard about it, and he brought me into his office, and we sat down, and he closed the door, and we had a conversation. We didn't have a conversation about the radio station. We didn't have a conversation about the cable company. We didn't have a conversation about anything but me. I mean, he was just solely interested in me. He wanted to help me make a decision that was best for me and my family. And I had two little kids at the time. My son was probably 2 or 3, and my daughter had just been born. I believe that's when that happened. And it was amazing. Even he had a phone call come in from Bill Walker. Bill Walker was his partner and kind of the CEO of the whole company. And I remember Sharon. I think Sharon was the office manager's name. And she said, Mr. Mefford, Mr. Walker's on line 1, or whatever line it was. And he said, tell him I'll call him back. And then she came on like 2-3 minutes later, and she said, he really needs to talk to you. And he said, tell him I'll call him back in a little while. And the fact that he made me the most important thing on his plate at that moment, I still think of that, and I get emotional about it, because it really solidified me to working for him and to being part of that team. So when I did that with this individual 10 years later, or 8 years, 9 years later, I wasn't doing it out of my way. I was doing it out of the fact that I knew how I felt when that happened. We do have a question, and how do you manage up properly to working with a boss and not a leader? So, big challenge, right? Especially if you're working in a company that doesn't have a lot of communication. I try to encourage in the companies I work with or that I coach that they've got to be able to bring questions to the top. And there has to be a forum for that, like quarterly meetings or monthly meetings. And this question came up to me last Friday, as a matter of fact, from a gentleman that had gone through one of my classes. And he told me, what happens when you work for a company that don't care about people anymore? They only care about profit. And my answer to him was long, but I'll share some of that with you. The reality of life is that all companies are interested in profits. Some companies mask it more than the others, and they do treat their people real well and still make a profit. My answer to this person is the same way I would answer that question, is you have to reframe your thought process. And, in some ways of psychology, CBT, if you ever follow or read anything about that, you talk about, what you think creates your emotions, and your emotions drive your actions, and your actions get you your results. So in some situations, you have to think of, what are you thinking about? And you're really feeling that I'm not being treated very well here, or that I have no way to communicate and I'm being micromanaged instead of led in a lot of cases. Let me add one thing to that: thought, emotion, action, results, and that is evidence. What is making you say that? What is the core evidence that you have that is not taking place? Because many times as people, employees, employers, we do the same as it ever was mentality, where this is the way it's always been, so we just fall into place in that. So in that instance, you want to look at your evidence, and can you reframe that? If you can't, you set up the meeting. There's no reason to work for a company that you're not comfortable working in. Don't only go for that golden goose, that paycheck. Set up a meeting, you create the scenario, sit down with your boss, your leader, the employer, whoever it is, and have a heartfelt conversation with them. Look, that person didn't get to where they are in 2023 by not listening to people. You create the forum. Even if you're at the lowest rung of the totem pole, they're going to respect you for that. Now, if you ever get the opportunity to work for somebody that had gone through a Dale Carnegie class, do a little research if you haven't, and look at the principles and share that with them. Especially somebody that promotes the principles a lot. I always tell my class, if I have CEOs in the class that are taking a class, I say to them, I'm going to encourage, if you send other people to the class that are at the bottom end of your team, I'm going to encourage them to sit down and talk to you when they see you're not following the principles. There is no reason to work in this world, none. There's many opportunities out there to work in this world where your voice is not being heard. Start with respect, extremely respectful. Don't walk in with anything but facts. Leave the emotions at the door and come in and have a conversation. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. But that's the way I would answer that. So whoever asked that question, if you want to leave another message and we can go into some more details about that, we can do that. So that is something that we can always discuss. So before we get to the rest of this, we're going to take a quick break, go back to some commercials. No, the camera is still working. So coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, This is Motivation U, the podcast.
Looking for more reasons to celebrate? We have them here at Celebration Point. Enjoy some of the newest additions to our already celebratory lineup, like Dave & Buster's, Les Macarons, and Prime and Pearl. There's always a reason to celebrate. Join us anytime for any occasion. Celebration Point, where Gators come to celebrate.
And my name is Bob Ganzak, coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, inside the Coach's Podcast Room. What a great restaurant. You got the museum over there with all of the trophies and memorabilia. And one of the things that I love about Spurrier's is when you go past the visors and you realize that Coach, actually used all those visors. And it's really a great place to go. And seeing some of the, Danny Werfel's trophies and Judd Davis, an old golfing buddy of mine, his Lou Groza Award is here, and so many more. Just to come in and visit and see it. All the helmets in the background, and you can rent this room too. You can actually, if you've got a group of, I don't know what they said, 5 or 6 in here. If you have a group of that size and you want a soundproof, private place to have your meal, this is a great room to do it. They clean the desks out of here and the cameras and everything else, put them away, and this room is yours. And it's just got to come here to Spurrier's and find out. I'd probably call them and find out exactly what they could do. But this is a great restaurant in a wonderful place and atmosphere to come to. Great staff, great people. It doesn't matter if it's Chef Mark or if it's Andrew, the managing partner, any of the wait staff, or even the guy that kind of sells you some of the memorabilia that is out front. He's a good guy too. So all of them. Dale Carnegie class is coming up. We have one on the schedule in Lake City coming up. That's middle of March. That one's targeted for. Could be coming in Valdosta. There might be 1 or 2 on that website for Jacksonville. So if you're in that area, and you just go to jacksonville.dalecarnegie.com. jacksonville.dalecarnegie.com. Find courses. Go ahead, sign up. You can register right online. You can pay right online. Everything is very simple there. So let's go back to what we were talking about. Coaching, and leadership, and those thoughts. So when we start looking at this way of, I was talking about not taking a phone call. Well, that goes back to that open door policy. Do you have one or don't you? Well, I always had an open door policy. And then something that I found was happening in that open door policy was that the one-on-one meetings were not as valuable because anybody could walk in at any time. The other thing I found is when you had an open door policy, you really weren't getting to the bottom of what things were. Now, I had a little caveat in my open door policy. I always told people, if you want to close the door, you can. And sometimes people did, and we had a heartfelt talk. Yet, in those situations, it's much better now, in my opinion, that you're able to showcase what's going on behind closed doors. That you're able to come in, have that meeting, and your first thought is, uh-oh, somebody's in trouble. Well, that's when you had an open door policy. If the door was shut, people said, hey, there's something wrong. He never has his door shut. She never has her door shut. Something must be going on. And those things spread like wildfire through the company. But if you're always in there doing your work, doing your job, as the leader, as the executive, or whatever you're doing, your door is closed. The closed door is, it's business. And as you go through it, people will know that that is a safe haven for them to go in and have a conversation. And as you build your culture, that'll grow also. So that's just, that's just one of my thought processes on that. I've shifted over the years from that open door policy to more of a closed door policy, and I see that helping a lot. So a big part of that is the communication element. You've got to let people know that you have an open communication, where you're not shutting people down all the time. And a lot of times when you have an open door policy and people walk in, you're unprepared for whatever is going on. You're not going to respond the right way. Your facial expression might give away exactly what you're thinking. You have to be very careful. So when you have that policy where you set up a meeting and you sit down, you can prepare for that. And it has a bigger impact on that. And scheduling those one-on-ones are really important. I mean, people need that, And please always remember, take notes in your meetings. Take notes. One of the things that I've found that lately what I've done is I take notes, and then right before the meeting is over, I ask the person I'm meeting with, I said, look, I've been taking notes as you saw. Can I ask you a couple of questions? Are these the things we covered? Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Is there anything that you felt, I missed or I misinterpreted? And then it gives them that feedback, which gives them that, that strong feeling. And, you don't want to be like a gotcha manager who only reacts to a negative stimulus. You want to be somebody that is constantly in tune with your team and working with your team and coaching your team so that everything moves along. And what are the things and how do we get the coaching? How do we get that? Well, sometimes the employee will come to you and say, hey, I'm struggling in this area. Can you give me some help? Okay, that's one scenario. Second scenario, you identify something that they're struggling with, and then you can approach them. In open communication, you can sit down and say, hey, is there something in this area that I can help you with? Now, going back to what we were talking about, millennials, they like to be trained and given the opportunity to grow. So if you're working with young people in your staff, give them that opportunity to grow. And, I hear a lot of people my age or a little bit younger than me who are maybe electronically challenged in some areas. And then there's another generation that is very good at it. If you're the only person that is showing them how to do things, they may need somebody with a skill level higher than yours in the technology end to help them with that. So either the employee might identify it, you might identify it. Third place it comes from is there are times when a client may identify a problem. They may call in, send you a note, or say something to, the individual that is communicating with them, and that's another way. And then the fourth coaching area is if you have a need. If there is a void on your team, you may be going to one of your employees and saying, look, what would you think about learning this skill set? We have a need here. What would you think about growing into that position? And you got to be careful with that, because sometimes we can come off even with no intention as a threatening thing, like either or. It's not that. You're looking for somebody that may want to move in another direction. So we go back to the first key, right? That person we take for granted. If we open up the communication doors, then we know, as we're developing people, who may be strong candidates for that type of an opportunity. So that's something. It's something that's vitally important as we move forward as leaders. Okay, I just want to recap. One thing, first one, we want to make sure that we give that attention even to our best employees. We want to help them grow. That's vitally important. Don't take them for granted. Set them up on an opportunity to be able to grow. Two is when you have those one-on-one meetings, open door, closed door, whatever your policy is and however you're going to do it, be a good listener. Encourage them to talk about themselves. Principle number 7 from the Dale Carnegie book. Encourage them to talk about themselves and put their whole focus on them. That is vitally important. And identify areas that people need to be coached in or voids that you may have in your company. So those are the first two things. The third one is, how do we grow and develop people? And this is where we'll get into that millennial thing a little bit. Two little stories about that. In training, the business that I'm in, we like to tell this story, and I know many of people that I've talked to in Carnegie use this same story many times. And that's the CFO talking to the CEO. And the CFO says, what happens if we train all these people and then they leave us? And the CEO's comeback to that is, what happens if we don't train them and they stay? So we love to use that. You know, it's kind of funny, but really that thought process is really accurate. As I said, with millennials, there's two things that I wanted to say. When somebody comes to me that is in their 50s, early 60s, late 40s, and they start complaining about millennials or Gen Z, the group that's right below them, you know, the first thing I do is I look at them and I said, we raised them. They're our kids. I mean, they spent 18 years in your house before they went off to college or wherever. What happened? How did we get to that point if that's what your idea is? And again, just like that answer earlier, you have to reframe your thought process. You can't go by, this was the way that I was raised. Hey, I was thinking, I was driving down here today, you know, some of the things that I'm recalling, we didn't even have email. We used fax machines. I mean, the internet wasn't available to anybody. I mean, we sent handwritten letters. We used whiteout. Some people now, I say whiteout, they think it's a football game at Penn State. And whiteout was the stuff that when you made a mistake, hey, we didn't have spell check. We had thesauruses. We had dictionaries to learn how to spell words. If there was a big word we didn't know how to spell, we had to use it. Typos were terrible. I was a lousy person on the typewriter. And we had, you know, the best typewriters back in the 80s. Electric. Some people didn't even use those. They still had the old, you know, I'm telling you, life has changed. You can't use the same thought process that you were brought up in business today. Things are different. Just the nature of human life has shifted. You know, that you just, so when we start thinking about that, you have to really think that you're going to have to, I hate the word gamble because it's not a gamble. You're going to have to invest. You're going to have to invest in your team. One of the things that I was having a conversation with a business head of training and development for a big company in Jacksonville last week. We had a phone call, and he kept on using the term soft skills. Yeah, we come to you for soft skills training, soft skills training. And I know there's a definition of that. But you know what? What people talk about as soft skill training, when I'm in the training room, those are hard skills to learn. I mean, you're talking about people that have lived 20, 25, 30, 40, 45 years struggling with that thing that you call soft skills. To them, it is hard skills. It is difficult for a lot of people to be able to communicate with somebody else. All of the emotions that go into it. So I don't look at things as soft skills. You know, in my mind, this is tough. It was tough for me when I went through the Dale Carnegie class. I spent a lot of time inside my own mind with my fear and thinking that people were looking at me and that I was messing up and making mistakes. And, you know, that's a terrible way to live. And then you're shown a way to get through that. We need to train people in our lives. We need to spend the time, invest the money to train our team in many different areas. You know, I was talking to a gentleman probably about 6 months ago, and runs a very, very good organization. I shouldn't say good. Runs a great organization. You know, one of the things he does is he buys a Babbel subscription for each of his employees. I'm like, okay. He encourages them to learn other languages. And it's like $300 for, and they get to pick any language they want, and they can learn multiple languages, you know, Italian, whatever you want to learn. And he encourages them to do that. And I said, why? And he said that, you know, he has read at least that in many areas, people that study different languages open up their brain to more input, ideas and thoughts. He said it's like people that learn to read music do the same thing. They tend to have more aptitude when it comes to learning other things within the company and organization. I thought to myself, what a great idea. You know, it has nothing to do with their business, but he encourages that, not only to help them, give them something that they can do, but it has a value coming back to the company in more ways than one. So when we're dealing with the younger generations, don't be somebody that is constantly casting a stone. You know, we like to criticize, condemn, or complain, you know, constantly. I see it. I love reading comments on Twitter. And because of what I do, I'll go into the entire thread, and there's a lot of trash in there too, by the way. But I'll read the entire thread. And I'll give you an, for instance, I'm a huge Springsteen fan. And this world tour, the man is 73 years old now, out on world tour, putting on incredible shows. Go to YouTube and, you know, just search Bruce Springsteen 2023 tour and watch some of the videos. That absolutely excellent. And I've seen them over 100 times. You know. Well, there was a real challenge for people with ticket prices. So you continue to see that. And as you read down through all of it's like 99% of the people are complaining about it. Negative, 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 because that's what we like to do. So take that back into our businesses, and we tend to be critical of other people. That's our first instinct. Mr. Carnegie's first principle, Jared's reading them right now. His first principle, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Doesn't mean you don't correct people, but don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Think of that. As a leader, why would you want to sit there and be critical to other people about your young teammates, the young people on your staff, pointing those fingers at them? First of all, you hired them, okay? What was the interview process like? Were you able to identify any challenges that you might have? Okay. What is your training program like? Do you have an open door policy? Do you have a closed door policy? Do you have a culture that allows people to communicate up the chain, down the chain, across the chain? Do you give people the opportunity to grow? Are you putting them in programs that will help them develop? Are you paying for certain situations so that they become better at their job and better at their communication skills? You know, if you're doing all that and you still have the complaints, then maybe you hired the wrong person for your team. Have you changed? Has your management style changed? Are you treating individuals differently? You may be a 55-year-old individual who is managing a group of 23, 24, 25-year-olds. Have you sat down and really found out some of the things that are going on in their mind? One of the things that young people want, if you look at the scale of things that they would like to have in a job, the highest rated in the survey that I read was training and development. The second one was flexible hours. And the third one, if I remember it correctly, was cash bonuses. They wanted a goal set, and it didn't matter if you set the goal here and 10% or 20% over, they get a bonus. They like that. They like that feedback. And then the rest of them got down to like 1%, 2%. Those were by far the three highest in this survey that I read. Was, number one, train me, develop me, I've got a career in front of me, I want to grow. When I've talked to young people that have left a company and gone to someplace else, and you hear all of the emotional sides, you get through that, you wade through it, and you get down to the real challenge, it's usually they weren't being given the opportunity to grow. And always remember that engagement, employee engagement, the number one driver is the relationship with their immediate supervisor. Relationship with the immediate supervisor. Think about that. So if you're the immediate supervisor complaining about somebody, if I sat with them, they might be doing the same thing about you, because that's, so I'm always one that I try not to. I shouldn't say always. I try not to take the first verse out of somebody's mouth. I try to go a little deeper and know that there's some emotion that is sitting there. Not to shift too much, but in politics, if I see somebody that is constantly criticizing one side or the other and never criticizing the side that they're for, that makes me think for a second, because nobody out there is perfect in the political world, And when we start looking at things and taking just facts and balancing them, then you can really get a better picture of what's going on. We have to remember that as people develop in our lives, as people develop in our teams, you have to invest in your team. Their goals change. Their goals do change. If you have somebody that came to you when their kids were young, like I did, I talked about that earlier. I had a 2-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old. That's one set of life. And 5, 6 years down the road, all of a sudden my children are, 8, 9, and 7, 9 years old, 7 years old. My life changed at that time, didn't it? Before, they weren't going to school, they had to go to daycare or wherever they had to go. Now they're in school, there's school things that are going on. You have got to evolve with your team. You've got to understand that your team is changing, that their lives are changing, and you have to be in tune with that. Our tendency is to say, well, I was never given those opportunities. I was never treated that way. I'll bet you that if you were given that opportunity when your kids were young, you would have grabbed it. You would have grabbed it at that time. You would have taken that opportunity, but you were never offered that opportunity. And remember how you felt and frustrated because you couldn't go see your kids, recital at school or whatever it was, the little play that they did at lunch, or when they had grandparents' day, you couldn't go with with your parents to see what your kids were doing for grandparents' day, whatever it was. So lives change. Your needs change. The company grows. You've got to share that with your team. As the company evolves and grows, they may have to be challenged to grow with it. And you've got to be able to have the open communication to allow that to happen. So that's a big part of that. Always remember that people will support something that they are given the opportunity to help create. So getting your input from your team, getting their ideas and thoughts, big part of that. If there's a program that you would love to go through, our leadership training for managers in Dale Carnegie, it's just such a wonderful program. We spend a lot of time on that part. How do you get the input? How do you have a meeting to get that input? And then how do you brainstorm? How do you do green light thinking? And after the green light thinking, there has to be a decision made. How do you shift to the red light thinking where you're making a decision? So those things are really, it's in there. You can take that online. It's a great program. It's, I think, 7 sessions. I'm working with a company right now in Jacksonville. We're developing an idea for an in-house just for their leadership team to do that program. So remember that, people will support something that they're given the opportunity to have creative ideas in. All right, that's really important. Sometimes people want to change, and you don't want them to. Sometimes we want other people to change, and we expect them always to say yes. Think of that. That last thought. If they want to change and evolve, as a leader, many times we say no. But when we want them to change, we expect them to say yes. You've got to open up the lines of communication to be able to convey to people the changes that you need to make and to understand the changes that they want to make. So, wrapping things up, 3 key points. Train. Train. Focus on the person. Train your team. Strong listener. Encourage them to grow. Know that as your company evolves, that your employees' lives are evolving at the same time. You have to be in tune not only with the growth of your company, but with the changes going on in the minds, the hearts, the careers, the lives, and the families of your team. Look forward to being back here next week. My name is Bob Ganzak. This is Motivation U, the podcast.